Hello everybody, welcome back to another Warcry video. It's currently round 3 in my Warcry popularity contest. That's still ongoing at the moment. A big thank you to everyone who's voted so far in rounds 1 and 2. Today I have for you the results of round 2. We've got groups 2 and 7, where Askurgan Trueblades and Ironjawz managed to win. So we are going to be looking at those two factions. We're going to be seeing what makes them tick, and we're going to be doing some list building for them. I'm going to try and check out what the most popular lists are for those factions and see if there's any interesting twists on those lists that I can add for myself. But yeah, without further ado, let's get going. Okay, so the winner of round 2 was the Askurgan Trueblades. They're one of the newer Warcry factions. They were released in the third box of the Heart of Gur cycle, and they're really cool. They're actually one of the more popular factions aesthetically that came out of the recent boxes for Warcry, and I think that showed. They managed to win this round, and in terms of how they play, it's a very different playstyle from most other warbands. They are a mid-range all-vampire warband, and they're characterized by good movement. They all have movement 5, apart from one or two of the fighters who have movement 6. But also, one of the big features about them is that they all have a low amount of attacks, but really high damage. So what we're going to be looking for are things that can maybe give extra actions, or buff those attacks in some way to really kind of maximize the damage that each of those fighters can actually put out. And secondly, the other big thing they've got going for them is the Askurgan Exemplar. It's one of the best generic fighters in the Death Grand Alliance, so if you ever need just a fighter to use for damage, the Exemplar is a really good and really solid shout. It's only 205 points, so it's something that I would heavily recommend. Looking at the list of fighters available for the Askurgan Trueblades, there are only really 3 fighters that I find are quite outstanding, and the rest of them might have some other kind of niche uses, but in terms of damage potential and in terms of I find utility on the battlefield, these are the 3 that I'd be looking at. We've got the Askurgan Exemplar, as I've said already. It's got the highest damage potential in the entire warband, with an average weighted damage of 8.5. Then you've got the Askurgan Ascetic with Charnel Mace. There are 2 options for your ascetics in terms of the weaponry. I prefer the mace because I think it has the most reliable damage profile at that strength 6 with the 3-4. I always like, say, 2-3 damage profiles or 3-4 damage profiles. I think it gives you a very clear idea of how much damage your fighter's going to do during your games, and it's really useful if you're trying to figure out how much damage something's going to do on the fly. And then finally, we've got the Askurgan Acolyte with Throat Taker. I really like the Throat Taker. It's got a 3-inch range on its attacks, so if you combine that 3-inch range plus its 5-inch move, you're looking at an 8-inch threat range, which it's a long way on a Warcry battlefield, and it gives a really good zone of control for your Throat Taker. It's 90 points, which it isn't exactly cheap. Like I said, it is a warband of mid-range fighters, but you've got the 12 wounds there, which give you some kind of survivability. Along with that 3-inch range, it will keep you out of trouble for quite a while when you're playing your games. Now, something else to talk about whilst you're building a Trueblades list is looking at the abilities. I find that most of the abilities themselves are highly situational. Beast Familiar on the Pariah is probably the best utility ability that you've got in there. It's essentially a targeted 20-inch range, no disengage ability, so depending on the kinds of build that you have and the kind of build that your opponent is running, I could see it as being useful, but it isn't something that I would go out of my way to build with. Secondly, you've got Terrifying Howl on your Curse Blood. Curse Blood is the big dog vampire that you also get in the set. It's fine. It's got a 3-inch range, and within that 3 inches, no one can react. So this can be quite strong, I think, depending on the opponent. If you're playing against a warband that likes to counter a lot, for example, maybe you're playing against Ossiarch Bone Reapers, turning off all of their reactions and forcing them just to use their base damage can actually be quite strong. But I think that 190 points for the Curse Blood puts it just out of reach where you would just want to just throw one into one of your lists, especially when you're going to be using the exemplars anyway to do the damage that you need to do. So I've got a couple of lists that I've put together here. One is for pure Trueblades. It's probably how I would be looking to run them. I've said before that the abilities themselves are too situational, so what you're effectively going to be doing is looking at the best fighters in your list and building something around that. You've got the 2 Askurgan exemplars where you can see it, the strength 6 damage and the force 6 damage profile. It's really something that you can build around, and just as a generic fighter, it's very, very good. I've got here 2 ascetics with the mace, just because I like the mace and it does the most damage out of the 2 ascetic builds. And then I've got 4 throat takers. The 4 throat takers with that 3-inch range will really be able to get places onto the battlefield, use that range to keep themselves safe and to bully other chaff off of objectives. So because the range is so high, you'll be able to contest an objective with your throat taker, be out of melee range of whatever else is contesting that objective, but still be able to attack. And I find that extremely valuable for them. And yeah, that's why I've got 4 of them in here. Now, the second list I've got for you is really it's barely a Trueblades list, but you know it's legal as an Askurgan Trueblades warband. It's got the 2 exemplars again because they have a lot of damage, but here I'm using effectively all of the exiled dead. We've got Dean Telos the Exile, Prentice Markov, Regulus, Ion, Coil, Bolt, and Vlash. And what we're using them for is to add the numbers to the exemplar's damage profiles. I think the zombies themselves are actually really good value because they're able to get more attacks off of Daintelos's unique ability and also off of Van Hel's Dance Macabre. And what it also allows you to do is open up Soulblight Gravelord Resurrection tricks. All the zombies themselves, they'll have the minion rune mark, so you're able to bring them back to life once they die. They are zombies, so they're slightly more survivable than your basic skeleton. And they'll have move 4, which is interesting, so they're able to get places a little bit more quickly than your other Soulblight Gravelord units might otherwise be able to. If you wanted to expand this out a little bit, I was talking about the Cursed Blood with its no reaction ability. I think that might be pretty interesting in this kind of list. Maybe if you wanted to run 1 exemplar and a Cursed Blood, because the majority of those zombies only have strength 3, they are very vulnerable to counter. But if you did run the Cursed Blood in there, pop its ability, and then start attacking with zombies, your opponent wouldn't be able to counter. So you'll effectively take less damage than you would do normally. And I think that's something that might be interesting. Moving on to Group 7, their winner was Ironjawz. Ironjawz are a mid-range warband, characterized by relatively slow fighters, but with plenty of movement buffs and a lot of damage potential from their big characters, coupled with a lot of wounds. So they have the survivability in there, they have the damage in there, and I feel like they really take advantage of that movement 3. I've talked about this in previous videos, where movement is pointed extremely highly in Warcry, and if you have a warband that comprises of movement 3 fighters, usually they will have better stats elsewhere in terms of the actual points you're going to be paying for them. They have access to very powerful boss characters, as well as all of the allies you would see usefully out of Destruction Soup and the Grand Alliance Destruction. They can get access to members of the Gobapalooza, as well as some of the other faster Gloomspite Gifts characters, if that's what you want to do and that's what you want to ally in. Alternatively, if they need even more punch, they've got access to the big ogre characters. So all around, I think they're a very balanced warband. They can put a lot of different builds on the table, and because of their natural toughness and natural damage, they can generally do pretty well. So here's an example of what you would consider the meta warband for Ironjawz. You've got a Mega Boss as your hero, you've got a Crusher that you're allying in, a Brute with a pair of Brute Choppers, a Brugit, and several Ardboys with big choppers. The Crusher that you're allying in, it's got a large wound pool and it's got a lot of damage for really not all that many points. So it makes for an extremely difficult piece that your opponent basically has to deal with. It's got a double on the Maw Path, which adds 3 inches to its move characteristic for its next move. So effectively with a 7-inch movement, along with its 1-inch range on its attacks, gives it an 8-inch threat range, which is quite considerable considering how much damage it can actually do. The Brute is there specifically, it's got the U-Messen ability, which is kind of the equalizer against much larger warbands when you're playing on objective missions. And then you've got the Brugit's damage boost. You can use the Brugit on your Crusher or your Mega Boss to really boost their attacks. So instead of doing just a normal move attack, you can use the Brugit first, give those big fighters more power, and then use their movement abilities to run in. Because you're using the attack boost from the Brugit instead of the Mega Boss or the Crusher itself, it frees up abilities on those two other fighters to be able to use for their movement buffs. Something also to mention is that all of the orcs themselves have the charge double, which if they are within 6 inches of an opponent fighter, they effectively get a free move. So despite that base movement of 3 almost across the board here, that doesn't mean that this warband is slow. Once it gets into range, it can make those free moves and then gets to attack, and it can put a lot of force in different places where you would want them to be. Something I do want to talk about is that 245 points that the Crusher takes up. There are a number of different builds that you could go depending on what you expect. Maybe you're playing in a tournament and you expect there to be different kind of warbands. It could be a Goblin Bounder boss if you wanted to go and you wanted to hunt key fighters. It could be a Boggle-Eye and a Gore-Tropper Brute, which would give you some extra utility. The Boggle-Eye, as we remember, is a net from the Gobbapalooza, and you would have the additional Gore-Tropper Brute in there if you're playing against very large warbands and you need to cover multiple objectives, possibly to use Umessin. Or you can simply bring 3 extra Ardboys if you just wanted more guys on the field. I've put a list together here. I'll be the first to admit that I don't really play Ironjawz, but I've played against them enough to see kind of what's good and what isn't. I didn't just want to build another destruction soup list. I was looking at the Ardboys themselves. As a fighter, they're extremely good. They've got that 15 wounds and that toughness 4, which makes them incredibly survivable for the 80 points. And if you're looking at an Ardboy with Big Chopper, it says 8 here, but I'm going to explain that in a second. They have 3 attacks at strength 4, 2, 4, which is a very solid and a very respectable damage profile. Like I said, that movement of 3 is really keeping their points down. If they had movement 4, you'd probably be looking at a 90-95 point fighter. So paying those 80 points, I think, is a really good bargain. The question that I had was how can we extend their usefulness? And so for that, we've got a pair of War Chanters. War Chanters have a double called War Chanters Beat, which is an AoE +1 attack boost. And now, I think as a double, it's incredibly worthwhile taking something like this. Doubles are generally very easy to play around, so if you have some high impact doubles, you're generally going to be able to use 2 or 3 of them during any specific turn. So it's potentially a lot of abilities that you can throw out there. I've got a Brugit in there as well, because the Brugit has its double that can add another 3 attacks, and between the War Chanters and the Brugit, you can turn your Ardboys into guided missiles. You can use 2 of your doubles to give the Ardboy 7 attacks, that's 1 War Chanter and a Brugit, and then you can use your third double to get its movement ability off, or if you wanted, you can use it again for another War Chanter if you have overlapping zones. 6 inches is a long way on a Warcry battlefield to push it up to 8 attacks. That's before it's even used any abilities of its own if you happen to have the dice left. And 7 or 8 attacks at strength 4 doing 2/4 damage, that'll put a dent in most fighters. And remember, the War Chanters are an AoE ability, so what they're actually doing is buffing most of the Ardboys that you've got on the battlefield, as opposed to just the one guy off of the Brugit. I've also put a Brute in there with a pair of Brute Choppers. This again is for a little bit more control if you're playing against Horde warbands on objective missions, but all those Ardboys there, they're not going to be one-shot very easily, so I think what you'll actually find is the warband will win out in that war of attrition. Just use the extra value and the extra attacks that it's getting off of those War Chanters really to grind down your opponent and survive the battle that way. And that's it from me from this week. A big thank you to everyone who is participating in my little event. It's really interesting for me to see what kind of warbands are going to win it, and it's really interesting for me to really have the opportunity to take a look at warbands I might not otherwise be looking at, really look at those lists and have to list build for them. Ultimately, there are only so many events that I can go to and only so many games I can actually get in, so a lot of stuff just sits on the sidelines. But yeah, I've been really enjoying it. So again, a big thank you to everyone who's participating. Voting for round 3 is still live, so please check that out. I will put the links to the polls in the description below. Vote Rotmire Creed for me, please. I really enjoy Rotmire Creed. Creed. I played a lot of Rotmire Creed competitively very early on in the Warcry cycle for this season, and I think it'd be very interesting for me to kind of go back and revisit those lists, see where they are now, especially now that the meta has a chance to evolve, and we've got Bladeborn now, so I think writing would be very interesting as my knowledge of the game has improved also. But yeah, go run my creeds. You can win it. And with that, that's it. That's it from me for today. If you like what you saw, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know. Let me know down in the comments section below what you thought about these two lists that I put forward and about these two factions. If you have any interesting lists for the Askurgan Trueblades or Ironjawz, I'd be more than happy to check them out and to see how they play. Or else, if you just think that what I've put forward is absolutely crazy and it couldn't work, please let me know. I'm always happy to accept critique for what I've done, and we can have a good conversation. But yeah, that's it. That's it from me for today. Please do not forget to vote, and I will see you next time.